They called me a patron of beauty. I only wanted to hear perfection, one note so pure it would silence the stars. A foolish dream, or so I thought, until that evening. The grand hall was a sea of gilded masks and whispered pleasantries, the air thick with the scent of old money and older ambitions. The orchestra played, competent but soulless. Then, from the shadowed corner, a single violin began to weep. It wasn't just music. It was a story of forgotten sorrows and impossible joys, a melody that couldn't exist in mortal form. That was my first encounter with the Maestra's influence. The night a single, impossible note changed everything I thought I knew about beauty. And so, the symphony began. Stay tuned to uncover the rest of this tale, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we journey to the ghosts of the past, to a world that once shone brighter than any star in its sector. We're talking about Kixis Prime, a name now whispered in hushed, sorrowful tones, but which was once sung in hymns of praise across a dozen systems. Imagine a planet where every city was a masterpiece, every street a gallery. Kixis Prime wasn't just a hub of civilization. It was the very soul of Imperial artistry. Its people, the Kixians, were not merely citizens. They were curators, poets, and virtuosos. They believed, with every fiber of their being, in the redemptive power of beauty. An old Kixian proverb says, "Our galleries were temples, our concerts, sermons." We believed art could redeem the soul. For them, a perfectly sculpted statue could inspire more piety than a 1,000-page prayer book, and a single, soaring note from a symphony could fortify a spirit better than any fortress wall. The planet's architecture was legendary. Spire cities of polished chrome and avericrete reached for the heavens, their surfaces inlaid with intricate mosaics depicting the grand history of humanity among the stars. Great domes of crystal glass housed botanical gardens where flora from every corner of the galaxy bloomed in impossible, breathtaking arrangements. These weren't just buildings. They were testaments to faith and ambition, carved in stone and steel. The air itself seemed to hum with a creative energy, a constant, gentle thrum of inspiration that touched everyone, from the most esteemed master artist to the humble street sweeper. Life on Kixis Prime was a performance. Social gatherings were elegant ballets of etiquette and wit. Political debates were conducted with the lyrical cadence of epic poetry. Even their military parades were renowned, not for their show of brute force, but for their precision, their color, and their sheer, breathtaking spectacle. The Planetary Defense Force, the Kixian Royal Guard, marched in armor that was as much a work of art as it was a suit of war, each plate exquisitely filigreed with gold and silver. They were protectors of a culture, guardians of beauty itself. In the grand halls of the governor's palace, the Lumina Concordiate, art was not just decoration, it was statecraft. Diplomats from neighboring worlds would be swayed not by threats or treaties alone, but by the overwhelming cultural majesty of Kixis Prime. To visit was to be humbled, to witness a civilization that had seemingly perfected the art of living. They exported culture, shipping priceless artworks and sending their most brilliant performers across the sector, spreading their belief that beauty was the highest, purest expression of the human spirit. But what happens when a society dedicates itself so completely to refinement and aesthetics? What becomes of a people who believe that beauty is the ultimate shield against the darkness? The story of Kixis Prime is a poignant, tragic answer to that very question. Because while their galleries served as temples, the galaxy is home to forces that have no respect for sanctuaries. While their concerts were sermons, there are entities that listen only to the screams of the damned. The Kixians believed art could redeem the soul, but they would soon learn a terrible lesson, that it could not save them from a universe that often prefers chaos to harmony and ruin to refinement. The fall of Kixis Prime is not just the story of a lost world. It is a cautionary tale about the fragility of civilization and the nature of the horrors that lurk just beyond the light. In our next chapter, we will delve into the first shadows that fell upon this jewel of the sector. The whispers that began in the dark corners of the pristine world, the subtle, dissonant notes that crept into their perfect symphony, heralding a doom that no one, in all their refined wisdom, could have ever foreseen. The arrival of the uninvited muse. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the lore. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the tragic beauty of Kixis Prime, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more stories from the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Let me know in the comments what you think about a society built entirely on art. We'll see you all in the next one. From the ashes of a forgotten age, a new sun rose, not of fire and plasma, but of gold and marble. Lucenvar. It wasn't just a city. It was Hanidia, a grand symphony taking its first breath, and at its heart stood a figure who was more than a ruler, more than a leader. They called him the patron. In the early cycles, Lucenvar was a promise whispered on the interstellar winds, a refuge for those whose souls spoke in color, in rhythm, in verse. The patron, whose own origins were shrouded in the mists of galactic lore, sent out a Kola beacon not of light, but of pure, unadulterated opportunity. Bring me your dreams. The call echoed through the data streams and subspace channels, and I will give you the universe as your canvas. And they came. From the crystalline spires of Xylos, the musicians arrived, their instruments carved from singing geodes that resonated with the planet's core. They could weave melodies that mimicked the birth of stars and the silent dance of nebulae. From the ink-dark worlds of the Nocturne cluster, the poets journeyed, their minds filled with verses that could capture the loneliness of a rogue planet or the fierce joy of a supernova. And from the iron-rich asteroid fields, the sculptors came, their hands capable of coaxing life from cold, unyielding metal and stone, shaping forms that defied gravity and convention. Lucenvar, transformed, its plazas, once silent, now thrummed with concertos that made the very air vibrate with emotion. Its stark walls bloomed with murals depicting epic deeds from histories that had never been written. Statues reached for the heavens, their metallic limbs gleaming under the twin suns, each one a question posed to the cosmos. The patron's philosophy was simple, yet profound. Art is not mere decoration, he would often say, his voice a calm counterpoint to the city's creative chaos. It is a form of prayer. It is the language we use to speak to the unspeakable, to touch the face of the divine. He believed that through the act of creation, a civilization could elevate itself, could reach out beyond the mundane veil of existence and commune with the fundamental forces of the universe. The great ateliers were built vast, cavernous spaces, where artists were given unlimited resources. Poets were given access to the Grand Archive, a repository of every word ever recorded by a dozen species. Painters were supplied with pigments synthesized from crushed comets and exotic flora. Sculptors worked with alloys that could shift their properties with a thought. There were no limits, no budgets, no deadlines, only the relentless pursuit of perfection. This period became known as the Ascension. The artists of Lucenvar were not just creating, they were channeling. A poet, deep in a trance-like state, wrote an epic that accurately described the gravitational waves of a black hole collision 1,000 light-years away, an event that wouldn't be detected by conventional science for another century. A composer wrote a symphony, the Hymn of the Void, whose central motif was later discovered to be a perfect mathematical representation of dark matter distribution in the sector. A sculptor, a woman named Eliera, created her masterpiece, The Listener. It was a towering figure of polished chrome and obsidian, faceless, with one hand cupped to a non-existent ear. It was beautiful, but also unsettling. It seemed to lean into the silence between notes, into the space between words. It was during the premiere of the Hymn of the Void that the first shift occurred, as the final, impossibly deep note faded into silence. A tremor ran through the grand concert hall. Not a physical tremor, but something deeper. A collective gasp went through the audience as, for a single, heart-stopping moment, every mind in the room felt a presence. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. It felt... curious. The patron felt it most keenly. He stood from his balcony seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. He had sought the divine through creation, pouring the collective soul of his people into the ether. And now, he realized with a dawning sense of awe and terror, Something had heard their prayer. Something was listening. The art began to change. The melodies grew more complex, incorporating harmonies that seemed to bend the rules of physics. The poems spoke of impossible geometries and colors that existed outside the visible spectrum. Ilara's statue, the listener, began to subtly change. Minuscule, almost imperceptible shifts in its posture were noted day by day. It was leaning further, listening more intently. The artists became conduits. They spoke of dreams filled with whispers from the static between stars. They painted landscapes of worlds no one had ever seen, yet they all shared the same alien sky. They were no longer just creating, they were transcribing. They were taking dictation from an unknown intelligence. The patron watched, his dream of artistic enlightenment twisting into something new, something far more significant and dangerous. He had wanted to speak to God, to touch the face of the divine. He gathered his chief artists, the creators of the most potent and resonant works. We sought the divine through creation, he told them, his voice heavy with the weight of his discovery. And we found something listening. The question was no longer how to create beauty. The question now was what would happen when the listener decided to speak back. The golden age of Lucenvar was at its zenith, but a new, uncertain dawn was breaking. The city, born of a patron's dream, now stood at the threshold of a reality far grander and more terrifying than anyone had ever imagined. The greatest work of art was yet to come, and its medium would be the fate of their entire civilization. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you were captivated by the story of Lucenvar, please hit that like button and subscribe for the next chapter of this cosmic saga. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever heard a sound so profound it felt like it was coming from inside your own soul? A melody so powerful it rearranged the very atoms in the air. This is the story of the Maestra, a figure who appeared as if from a dream, and whose music redefined the limits of what we thought was possible. Imagine a world saturated with noise, where every song has been sung, every chord has been struck. We thought we had heard it all. Then she arrived. No grand announcement, no fanfare, just whispers at first. Tales of a composer whose name no one knew, but whose music was unlike anything ever created. They called her the Maestra. Her legend grew in the shadows, passed from one astonished listener to another. People spoke of concerts held in forgotten place, the Sabbath cathedrals, moonlit clearings, forgotten subway stations. They said her music wasn't just heard, it was experienced, a full-body immersion into sound. Who was she? No one knew. She was a phantom, an enigma wrapped in a symphony. Descriptions varied wildly. Some said she was an old woman with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Others claimed she was a young prodigy, her face hidden behind a featureless mask. This mystery only fueled the public's obsession. Was she a recluse? A celestial being? Or was the Maestra simply a concept, an idea given form by our collective yearning for something new? The first official recording, if you could even call it that, leaked online. It wasn't a studio track. It was a raw, unfiltered audio file from one of her secret performances. The quality was poor, full of static and the muffled gasps of the audience. But through the noise, something extraordinary emerged. The music was impossible. It had no discernible rhythm, no traditional melody, yet it was perfectly harmonious. It built and swelled with an emotional intensity that was almost unbearable. It sounded like the birth of a star, the grieving of an ocean, and the laughter of a ghost, all at once. The file went viral overnight. Musicologists were baffled. They analyzed the waveforms, trying to deconstruct the composition, but their software crashed. The music defied all known theory. It didn't follow the rules because it created its own. This only intensified the global search for the Maestra. Journalists, documentarians, and obsessive fans scoured the globe for any clue, any hint of her next performance. The invitations were never public. They came as cryptic messages, a single musical note left on a doorstep, a series of coordinates whispered by a stranger in a crowd. To be chosen was like winning a lottery you never knew you entered. I was one of the lucky ones. My invitation was a simple, unmarked envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a time and a location. A derelict industrial warehouse by the old docks. Midnight. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this real? I had to find out. That night, the air was thick with anticipation. A diverse crowd gathered in the cavernous, dimly lit space. There were people from all walks of life, seasoned critics in expensive suits, young artists with paint-splattered jeans, curious onlookers who had followed the whispers. We were all united by a single question. What were we about to witness? The stage was bare. No instruments, no speakers, no microphones. Nothing. Just a single, empty chair in the center. A hush fell over the crowd as the clock struck midnight. Then she walked out from the shadows. She was ordinary. Not the mythical figure of legend, but a woman of indeterminate age, dressed in simple, dark clothing. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She didn't acknowledge us. She simply sat in the chair, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. And then it began. There was no conductor's baton, no downbeat. The music didn't start. It bloomed. It bloomed from the silence, from the very air around us. It was a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones, a frequency that felt both ancient and utterly new. I looked around, searching for the source, but there was none. The orchestra, we soon realized, was invisible. A man standing next to me whispered in sheer disbelief. Her orchestra played with no instruments. The sound came from the air itself from us. And he was right. The music wasn't being projected at us. It was being drawn out of us. The collective heartbeat of the crowd became the percussion. The shared, bated breath became a soaring woodwind section. Our own silent thoughts, our hopes and fears, wove together to form the intricate, heartbreaking melodies. The Maestra was not just a composer. She was a conduit. She wasn't playing music. She was channeling the symphony of humanity itself. She conducted our collective consciousness. The performance was a journey. We soared through ethereal soundscapes that shimmered like nebulae, then plunged into dissonant depths that echoed our deepest anxieties. I saw memories I had long forgotten flash before my eyes. I felt a profound connection to every single person in that room. Strangers who were now part of the same living, breathing composition. Tears streamed down faces, not from sadness, but from a sense of overwhelming beauty and belonging. We weren't an audience. We were the instrument. As the final note faded, it didn't end. It just dissolved back into the silence from which it came, leaving a quiet so profound it was more resonant than the music itself. The Maestra opened her eyes. For a fleeting moment, her gaze swept across the room, and in her eyes, I saw not pride or performance, but a deep, shared understanding. Then, as silently as she had appeared, she stood up and walked back into the shadows, leaving behind a room full of people who were forever changed. We stumbled out of that warehouse into the pre-dawn light, dazed and speechless. How do you describe the indescribable? How do you explain that for one night? You were part of a song created from the very fabric of your being. The legend of the Maestra was no longer a myth. It was a lived reality. She had shown us that music isn't just something we listen to. It's something we are. It's the rhythm of our blood, the harmony of our shared experience, and her performances. A transcendent reminder that the most beautiful orchestra in the world is the one that resides within us all. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the world of the Maestra. If this story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you did. Hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries that surround us. What do you think the source of the Maestra's power was? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The first time it happened, we dismissed it as a trick of the light, a collective hallucination brought on by the strange, hypnotic quality of the music. During the second movement of what was being called the Astral Symphony, a woman in the third row suddenly gasped, her eyes wide with something that wasn't just appreciation. She claimed to see a wash of impossible colors, a spectrum that didn't exist in our world, cascading from the strings of the lead cello. Others near her murmured in agreement. Some saw geometric patterns shifting on the ceiling. Others felt a sudden, inexplicable warmth, a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy that brought tears to their eyes. We were enchanted, believing we were part of a groundbreaking new form of art, a synesthetic masterpiece. The performers, cloaked in their simple, dark attire, seemed oblivious, lost in their own world of creation. The music was unlike anything we'd ever heard, dissonant yet harmonious, chaotic yet structured. It seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the bones, in the very soul. By the third performance, the rumors had spread like wildfire. The concert hall was packed, a mix of curious newcomers and returning veterans eager for another taste of the sublime. This time, the experiences were more intense, more personal. A man in the balcony claimed he relived the happiest day of his life in the span of a single, soaring violin note. Another felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, not of a heart attack, but of a profound, ancient sorrow that he somehow understood was not his own. The visions grew more defined. People whispered of seeing shimmering figures in their peripheral vision, of hearing faint, spectral voices woven between the chords. The joy was more ecstatic, the pain more visceral. The musicians played with a new fervor, a frantic energy that bordered on desperate. Their bodies swayed, no longer just with the rhythm of the music, but as if being pulled by unseen forces. Their faces were masks of concentration, sweat beading on their brows, eyes fixed on something beyond the sheet music, beyond the hall itself. The fourth concert was where the beautiful strangeness began to curdle into something truly unsettling. The line between audience and performance started to blur. During a particularly jarring crescendo, a dozen people in the front rows began to move in unison, their bodies contorting into strange, angular poses that mirrored the frantic bowing of the violas. They weren't dancing, they were being moved, like puppets on a string. The visions were no longer fleeting glimpses of color or light. People screamed, pointing at the stage, at the spaces between the musicians. They saw tears in the air, rents in the fabric of the room, through which they could see swirling nebulas and impossible architecture. The ecstasy was so intense, it became painful, and the pain so profound it became a strange kind of pleasure. We were trapped in a symphony of sensation, overloaded and overwhelmed. The music wasn't just being played for us anymore. It was being played through us. Subsequent performances abandoned any pretense of a traditional concert. They became rituals. The audience arrived not with programs, but with a sense of grim purpose. We knew what was coming. The musicians, gaunt and hollow-eyed, would take the stage, and the moment the first note sounded, the transformation would begin. The air would grow thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The visions were now shared hallucinations. We all saw the same spiraling vortex of non-light above the stage. We all felt the same phantom touch on our skin. The performances grew longer, more violent. Instruments would splinter. Strings would snap with reports like gunfire, yet the sound would continue unabated, pouring from some other source. During a now infamous performance, the lead violinist played until his fingers bled, the crimson droplets splattering onto his instrument, and the note he produced was a color we all saw, a sound we all felt as a physical blow. It was madness, a beautiful, terrible madness we willingly walked into time and time again. We became addicted to the experience, to the feeling of our own consciousness being stretched to its breaking point. We craved the moments of pure bliss, even if they were followed by hours of psychic agony. The line between reality and the world the music showed us grew thinner with every show. We would leave the hall dazed, seeing residual trails of impossible color in the mundane city streets, hearing echoes of the symphony in the wind. We knew something was fundamentally wrong. We knew we were witnessing something that should not be. Each note felt like it was unmaking the world, peeling back the layers of our perception to reveal a terrifying, awe-inspiring truth beneath. Each note taught a piece of reality. And we applauded. We applauded because we had to see what would happen when the last piece was finally torn away. The core group of attendees, the regulars, we started calling ourselves the listeners. We'd meet before the shows, not to discuss the music in terms of melody or composition, but to compare our visions, to map the terrain of the places the symphony took us. We were explorers of an invisible country. Some of us tried to document it. Artists would try to sketch the impossible geometry they saw. Writers would fill notebooks with descriptions of emotions that have no name. But our attempts were futile. How do you draw a color that has no wavelength? How do you describe a feeling that exists outside human experience? The music was a key, and it was unlocking a door in our minds, a door we never knew was there. And something was beginning to stir on the other side. The violence of the performances escalated. It was no longer just the instruments that suffered. During the final movement of the 7th concert, the percussionist began beating his drums, not with sticks, but with his bare fists, his rhythm a frantic, brutal counterpoint to the ethereal strings. He played until his hands were bruised and broken, a wild, ecstatic look in his eyes. The audience didn't recoil in horror. Instead, a wave of sympathetic, phantom pain washed over us. A collective agony that was somehow purifying. We felt his sacrifice, and in a twisted way, we were grateful for it. We were no longer just an audience. We were participants, acolytes, in a ceremony we didn't understand. The music demanded a price, and we were all, performers and listeners alike, paying it. The beautiful horror was consuming us. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment I lost the ability to distinguish between the concert hall and the rest of my life. The echoes of the music followed me everywhere. The world started to seem flimsy, like a stage set that could collapse at any moment. I would see the shimmering distortions in the air while pouring my morning coffee. I would feel this sudden, inexplicable sorrow while walking in the park. The symphony was rewriting my reality, overwriting the mundane code of my existence with its own chaotic, terrifying language. I knew I should stop going. I knew I should run and never look back. But I couldn't. None of us could. We were bound to it. The final performance was announced. A single, cryptic poster appeared overnight. The end of the song. We all knew what it meant. This would be the last time. This would be the performance where the door didn't just open, but was torn completely from its hinges. And we had to be there to see what came through. The night of the final performance, the air in the hall was electric with a mixture of terror and anticipation. There was no applause when the musicians took the stage. There was only a profound, prayerful silence. They looked less like people and more like weathered statues. Ancient and burdened, they raised their instruments. And as the first, final note sounded, it was not a sound at all. It was a wave of pure force that slammed into us, shattering not glass or plaster, but our very sense of self. The visions were no longer just visions. The hall dissolved around us, and we were floating in the stardusted void we had only glimpsed before. The pain and the ecstasy merged into a single, overwhelming sensation of being unmade and remade simultaneously. The music was a torrent, a storm of cosmic creation and destruction, and we were at its heart. Each of us was alone, yet we were all connected, our consciousnesses merging into a single, terrified, exultant entity. The music reached its crescendo, a sustained note that was the color of a dying star and the feeling of eternity. And in that moment, we saw them. The true players, not the wraiths on the stage, but the beings that moved them, vast and incomprehensible, their forms made of music and light and raw chaos. They were the composers of this madness. The music wasn't a performance for us. We, our minds, our reality, were the instruments they were playing. The final note held, stretching time to its breaking point. We felt our reality fraying, the last threads of what we knew to be true snapping one by one. And as the sound finally faded into an absolute, deafening silence, we were left with a single, terrifying question. When the music stops, what are we left with? What remains when the song that made you is over? We didn't know it then, but the silence that followed was worse than the sound that should not be. The silence was the end. Welcome back, lore masters, to our deep dive into the fall of a world. Today, we unravel a chapter so insidious, so masterfully deceptive, that it stands as a chilling testament to the seductive power of chaos. This is the story of how art became religion, how theaters became temples, and how an entire society willingly danced its way into damnation. Our story picks up with the Maestra, a figure who had already captivated the hearts and minds of the planet's elite. Her performances were more than mere entertainment. They were transcendent experiences. Her followers, utterly devoted, saw her not just as an artist, but as a prophetess, a guide to a new plane of existence. They craved more, always more, of the sensations she promised. And the Maestra, ever the visionary, knew exactly how to give it to them. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed a patron, someone with bottomless coffers and a blind eye to the true nature of her work. Lucenvar, as the planet's leading magnate, his wealth was legendary, surpassed only by his ego and his desperate need to be seen as a paragon of culture. The Maestra played him like a finely tuned instrument. She spoke of a cultural renaissance, of elevating the artistic soul of their world. She painted a picture of grand theaters, academies of the arts, and galleries that would rival those of Terra itself. Lucenvar, intoxicated by the vision and the prestige it would bring him, opened his vaults without a second thought. He saw himself as a modern-day Medici, a patron of the arts whose name would be etched in history. He funded the construction of magnificent edifices across the planet, each one a marvel of architecture, ostensibly dedicated to music, drama, and sculpture. He was celebrated in the high society circles as a savior of culture. It was a hero. It was a fool, because these were not theaters. They were temples. Every archway was designed to channel psychic energies. Every stage was an altar. Every seat was a pew for the enraptured congregation. The followers of the Maestra, her inner circle, knew the truth. They were the high priests and priestesses of a new faith. In a poignant, horrifying confession from a survivor, they later admitted, "We called it art. It was worship." Think about the sheer audacity, the brilliant deception of it all. To the public, these were the hottest tickets in town. An invitation to one of the Maestra's theaters was a sign of ultimate social status. The elite flocked to them, eager to witness the next boundary-pushing performance. They walked into these grand halls, admiring the strange, fluid sculptures and the unsettling, yet beautiful, murals depicting ecstatic figures in a riot of color. They didn't see the symbols of Slaanesh hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of the architecture. The plays they watched were not plays. They were rituals. The music they heard was not just music. It was a litany to the Prince of Pleasure. Each performance was designed to heighten the senses, to push the audience further into a state of pure, unadulterated sensation. The line between performer and observer blurred. The audience became participants, their collective emotional energy feeding the growing warp rift that the Maestra was carefully nurturing. The performances grew more and more extreme. What started as avant-garde drama escalated into displays of harrowing emotion and physical endurance. That left audiences breathless and spiritually drained, yet craving more. They were being conditioned, their souls slowly and methodically corrupted. They were taught to find beauty in pain, pleasure in sorrow, and ecstasy in excess. They were learning the catechism of Slaanesh without ever hearing his name. And he was the proud father of this movement. He'd attend the grand openings, smile for the and heave self-congratulatory speeches about his contribution to the arts. He'd watch the bizarre performances, perhaps finding them a bit strange, a bit too modern for his tastes, but he would dismiss his unease as a lack of artistic understanding. He was so blinded by his own vanity, so desperate for adulation, that he couldn't see the rot spreading from the very foundations he had paid for. He was financing his own world's destruction, one theater at a time. The Maestra's followers were now a fully fledged cult. They had their holy sites, their sacred texts, disguised as scripts and musical scores, and their congregation of unwitting thousands. They operated in the open, celebrated by the very society they sought to consume. The deception was total. It was a masterpiece of corruption, a symphony of damnation conducted by the Maestra herself. This is the true horror of Slaanesh. It doesn't always come with horns and claws and screaming demons. Sometimes it comes with a standing ovation. It arrives in a beautiful theater, offers you the best seat in the house, and puts on a show so mesmerizing that you give it your soul as applause. The people of this world weren't conquered by an invading army. They were seduced, one performance at a time, into offering themselves up willingly. The stage was now set, quite literally, for the final act. The temples were active, the congregation was primed, and the power of the Dark Prince was pooling, ready to burst forth. Lucenvar's grand cultural project was about to bear its terrible, terrible fruit. What happens when the curtain finally rises on the true performance? We'll explore that terrifying climax in our next chapter. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive lore, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the grim darkness of the far future. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Maestra's masterful deception. Have you ever heard a piece of music that felt like it was changing you from the inside out? Something so powerful it seemed to vibrate in your very bones. Now, imagine that feeling amplified 1,000 times, shared by thousands of people at once. This is the story of the first great planetary concert, an event whispered about in hushed tones, known only as the Festival of Flesh. It wasn't advertised on billboards or on the radio. The invitations were subtle, almost intuitive. A strange melody caught on the wind, a shared dream of a sprawling amphitheater under a sky of unfamiliar stars. Yet, thousands of us found our way there. We came from all walks of life, drawn by an invisible current, a promise of something beyond the ordinary. The stage was vast, an organic structure that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. The orchestra was unlike any I had ever seen. The instruments, they looked like they were alive, pulsing with a soft, internal light. The conductor raised his hands, and a silence fell that was more profound than any quiet I've ever known. It was a silence full of anticipation, a held breath shared by the entire world, it seemed. Then, the first note was played. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force. It swept over the crowd like a wave, and you could feel it sinking into your skin, resonating deep within your chest. The music was a living thing. It built layer upon layer, a complex tapestry of sound that told a story older than time itself. As the composition progressed, something extraordinary began to happen. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something sweet and metallic, like perfume and fresh rain on iron-rich soil. We weren't just listening anymore. We were part of the music. With every soaring string section, a jolt of energy would pass through the crowd. With every deep, resonant beat of the drums, we felt our own heartbeats synchronize, becoming one massive, unified pulse. People around me were changing, not in a frightening way, but in a way that was undeniably profound. A woman beside me, her face etched with the worries of a long life, slowly smoothed out, her eyes regaining a youthful, wondrous sparkle. A man who had walked in with a pronounced limp now stood tall and steady, swaying gently to the rhythm. It was as if the music was rewriting us, mending the broken parts and polishing the worn-out pieces of our very being. It was a fusion, a perfect, harmonious blend of blood, sound, and flesh. The performance built towards its climax, a crescendo that felt like it was tearing a hole in reality itself. The music swelled to an impossible volume, yet it wasn't deafening. It was illuminating. For a single, breathtaking moment, the barrier between the physical and the metaphysical seemed to dissolve. As one witness later described it, when the crescendo came, we felt the veil thin. The air tasted of iron and perfume. In that instant, we saw themes, glimpses of impossible geometries, clues our eyes weren't meant to see, and a feeling of connection to everything, to the entire universe. We were all one organism, moved by one song. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The final note hung in the air, shimmering, before fading into a perfect, peaceful silence. We stood there, breathless, looking at each other. We were the same, yet entirely different. We had been part of something sacred, something that defied explanation. We had attended the Festival of Flesh, and the music was now a part of us, forever written into our DNA. We left not with souvenirs or programs, but with a new understanding of what it means to be alive, a memory of a melody that still echoes in our souls. What was this concert? Where did the orchestra come from? These are questions we still ask ourselves. Perhaps it was a celestial event, a cosmic alignment that allowed music to become a creative force. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a glimpse into a different kind of existence. The only thing we know for sure is that for one night, music became magic, and it transformed every single person who was there to hear it. The festival has never been repeated, but those of us who were there are still listening, hoping to one day hear that impossible, beautiful music on the wind again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the strange and wonderful. If you enjoy exploring mysteries that blur the lines of reality, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring these stories to light. Until next time, stay curious. The air in the grand hall grew thick, heavy with an anticipation that had curdled into something sour and fearful. We had gathered for the final performance, the culmination of everything the Maestra had promised. Her music had reshaped our lives, lifted us from the mundane, and promised a transcendence we craved. But as she took the stage, a silence fell that was deeper than any absence of sound. It was a void, a hungry, listening darkness. She stood there, not with her usual serene smile, but with a gaze that seemed to pierce through us, seeing not our faces, but the very fabric of our souls. The first note she played was not from any instrument we knew. It was a sound that came from within us, a low, guttural hum of unease that vibrated in our bones. It was the sound of our own quiet desperation, our hidden anxieties, amplified and thrown back at us. Then, the transformation began. It was slow at first, a ripple in the air around her, a distortion of light. Her form, once so elegant and composed, started to shift and writhe. The beautiful silks of her gown seemed to melt away, revealing a skin that was a tapestry of impossible colors and textures. Her limbs elongated, her fingers becoming sharp. Delicate talons, the serene face we had adored, twisted into a visage of ecstatic agony, a symphony of pleasure and pain that was horrifyingly beautiful. She was no longer the Maestra. She was a nightmare given form, a demon born of excess and sensation. Her eyes, now multifaceted and glowing with an inner, violet light, swept across the audience, and as her true form was revealed, the music changed. The hum of our anxiety became a shriek of terror. But it wasn't just our terror. It was the collected suffering of countless souls, a chorus of despair from across galaxies and millennia. She wasn't playing an instrument. She was playing us. Our fear was her symphony, our pain, her melody. Every gasp, every sob, every racing heartbeat was a note in her grand, terrible composition. The music we had so admired was never about harmony or beauty in the way we understood it. It was the vibration of suffering itself, the raw, primal energy of sensation pushed to its absolute limit. She played us like strings. A voice beside me whispered. A voice cracked with a terrifying revelation, and we sang. It was true. We were her orchestra. Our breaking minds were the percussion, our shattered hopes the mournful woodwinds, our raw, screaming nerves the strings of a celestial, profane harp. The air crackled with psychic energy, and the very walls of the concert hall seemed to breathe in time with the dreadful cadence. The grand hall was no longer a place of art. It was an altar, and we were not an audience. We were the sacrifice. The music was a ritual, and its purpose was now terrifyingly clear. It was to tear down the veil between our reality and the swirling, chaotic dimension from which she had come. The vibrations were a key, unlocking a door that should have remained forever closed. As the music reached its crescendo, the world outside the hall began to warp. The sky through the stained glass windows bled into impossible hues of purple and pink. The stone of the building groaned, not under physical stress, but as if it were being remade into something alive and monstrous. We were the epicenter of a new kind of genesis. We had come seeking beauty, seeking an escape from the grayness of our lives. She had given it to us, but it was a beauty painted with the colors of madness. We had wanted to feel something, anything, more intensely. She granted that wish, plunging us into an ocean of sensations so overwhelming that it dissolved our very identities. We were no longer individuals. We were a single, resonant chord of exquisite agony and rapture. This was not an ending. It was a birth. The birth of a cult, founded not on belief or doctrine, but on a shared, undeniable experience. We were the first congregants, the founding members of a new faith dedicated to the demon Maestra, the embodiment of sensation. Our temple was the memory of her music, and our scripture was the echo of our own screams. In the heart of the storm she had created, A strange calm settled over us. The terror receded, replaced by a profound, horrifying acceptance. We had been unmade and then remade in her image. The suffering was still there, a constant, thrumming bass line, but it was no longer something to be feared. It was our connection to her, our holy sacrament. We had touched the divine, and it had scarred us into disciples. From that day forward, we sought to replicate her symphony. We became missionaries of sensation, seeking to share the gift she had given us. We played our own discordant music on the canvas of the world, seeking to make others sing as we had. The cult of the vibrant agony was born, a testament to the day the Maestra revealed her true nature and taught us that the most beautiful music is the sound of a soul being played to its breaking point. We were her instruments, and we would spend eternity playing her song. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark heart of the galaxy. If you enjoyed this story, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the edge of reality. Your support means everything and helps us continue to bring these stories to light. Stay safe, and always be wary of the music you can't get out of your head. Have you ever wondered what happens when a world's music dies? Not just fades away, but is stolen, twisted, and used as a weapon. That's the chilling reality in the 8th chapter of our story, Lucenvar's Awakening. This is where everything changes, where the beautiful, melodic world we've come to know begins to show its cracks, and a deep, unsettling corruption starts to seep through. Up until now, Lucenvar, our hero, has been on a quest, driven by a sense of duty and a love for the symphony that is his world. He's been chasing whispers, following dissonant chords, trying to restore a harmony he feels slipping away. But he's been looking at the symptoms, not the disease. In this chapter, the blindfold is ripped away. He doesn't just hear the discord anymore. He sees the source. He begins to understand the true, horrifying nature of the corruption that's spreading like a plague through the very soul of his reality. It starts subtly, a familiar melody in a village, one that should bring joy and celebration, now feels hollow. The notes are correct, the rhythm is there, but the emotion, the lifeblood of the music, is gone. It's like a beautiful painting drained of its color, leaving only a grayscale sketch. Lucenvar tries to correct it, to pour his own energy, his own harmony, back into the song, but it's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. The music he offers is swallowed, consumed, and the emptiness remains. This is his first clue. The corruption isn't just silencing music. It's feeding on it. It's a parasite that latches onto the world's symphony and drains it dry. As it travels, the signs become more alarming. He sees musicians playing with frantic, desperate energy, their faces pale and drawn, as if they are being physically drained. The more they play, the weaker they become, and the more the land around them seems to wither. Vibrant, singing forests turn into silent, petrified woods. Rivers that once babbled with musical currents become sluggish and quiet. The full, gut-wrenching truth is revealed to him in the heart of a once great city, Kixis Prime. This was the pinnacle of musical achievement, a city built from crystallized sound, where every citizen was a master musician. When Lucenvar arrives, he finds it unrecognizable. The towering spires of sound are crumbling, dissonant shrieks echo through the empty streets, and a pervasive, low hum of static hangs in the air. A sound of absolute nothingness. It is here that he finds the last few survivors, huddled in a soundproofed cellar, their faces etched with a terror that goes beyond mere fear. They tell him the story. They tell him of the Shadow Weaver, the entity behind the corruption. It promised them new power, new melodies, a symphony greater than any they had ever known. They were tempted. They began to experiment, to push the boundaries of their music. They started weaving small threads of this new, dark energy into their compositions. At first, it was intoxicating. Their songs had a new edge, a new depth they'd never felt before. But then came the cost. The music began to demand more. It wasn't enough to just play. The songs needed fuel. They needed life. The chilling realization dawns on Lucenvar as one of the survivors whispers. The terrible truth. Every song was a sacrifice, every note a soul. The musicians of Kixis Prime, in their hubris and ambition, had turned their art into a monstrous ritual. To create their perfect symphony. They began sacrificing the musical essence of others, draining the life force from their own people to power their compositions. The city didn't just fall silent, it consumed itself. The grand orchestra of Kixis Prime became a machine of soul consumption, and the musicians, its willing conductors. But the Shadow Weaver's corruption was a lie. It didn't give them control. It made them slaves. The more souls they fed to the music, the more it demanded, and the more the Shadow Weaver's influence grew. Now the entity has consumed the entire city, absorbing all the stolen souls, all the twisted music, and has turned Kixis Prime into its fortress, a dead heart from which its corruption now pumps through the veins of the world. Lucenvar stands before the silent, corrupted gates of the lost city, and for the first time, he feels true despair. He wasn't just too late to save a few villages. It was too late to save the heart of his world. Kixis Prime is lost. The awakening has come, but it's an awakening to a nightmare. He finally understands the enemy he's facing. It's not just a dissonance he needs to correct. It's a sentient hunger that devours souls, a corruption that twists the very essence of creation into a weapon of annihilation. His quest is no longer about restoration. It's about survival. It's about vengeance for the countless souls sacrificed on the altar of a mad symphony. He looks at the dead city, the monument to a world's ambition and folly, and a new song begins to form in his heart. It's not a song of harmony or healing. It's a song of grief, of anger, of resolve. A war? Anthem. The corruption has awakened, but so has He now knows the stakes. He knows that to defeat this shadow, he can't just be a musician. He must become a warrior. His symphony must become his sword. The loss of Kixis Prime is a devastating blow, a scar that will never truly heal. But it is also the fire that forges a new hero, one who understands the terrible price of failure. The battle for the world's soul has truly begun. This chapter is a turning point, transforming a quest for harmony into a desperate war. What do you think Lucenvar's first move will be? How can one person fight an enemy that feeds on the very thing he wields as a weapon? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of our story. If you're as captivated as I am, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in this epic saga. We post new videos every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Welcome back, lore masters and seekers of forbidden tales. Today, we delve into one of the most harrowing accounts ever recovered from the lost archives. The story of the city that became its own song of damnation. Our journey takes us to Chapter 9, ominously titled, The City That Screamed. Imagine a sprawling metropolis, a capital of a once great empire, its hive spires piercing the clouds like skeletal fingers. This was a city of order, of structure, of a billion souls moving in a predictable rhythm. But something broke. The rhythm. Something insidious wormed its way into the collective consciousness, a dissonant melody that started not in the air, but in the mind. It began subtly, a low hum, a phantom vibration felt deep within the bones. Citizens would pause, tilting their heads, trying to place the sound. Was it the city's ancient machinery? The whisper of the void between worlds? No one knew, but soon the hum grew, evolving into a complex, maddening symphony that only they could hear. The rhythm of their lives was being rewritten by an unseen conductor. Panic was the first movement. The city's authorities tried to quell the growing unease, dismissing it as mass hysteria, a temporary affliction of the psyche. They broadcast messages of calm, their voices drowned out by the ever-loudening chorus in people's heads. But you cannot reason with a song that has taken root in your soul. The music demanded expression. It demanded an orchestra. Then came the second movement. The transformation. The madness began to manifest physically. It started in the artisan districts, where the city's most creative and sensitive minds resided. A sculptor, driven by an unholy inspiration, stopped carving stone and began carving his own arm, meticulously shaping his Ona into the neck of a ghastly violin. A weaver, her fingers once deft with threads, used sinew and nerve to string a lyre across her own ribcage. The horror spread like a contagion. Citizens, from the highest noble to the lowest worker, began to see their own bodies not as flesh and blood, but as untapped instruments. Skin was stretched into drumheads, vocal cords were tortured into unearthly reeds, and bones were hollowed into flutes. The city's plazas, once filled with the sounds of commerce and conversation, now echoed with the wet, percussive sounds of this gruesome self-mutilation. They were not screaming in pain, not in the way we understand it. Their cries were notes. Their agony was harmony. They were becoming one with the music that had consumed them. The official chronicles from this period are fragmented, filled with the deranged scrawlings of scribes who were also succumbing. One chilling entry reads, "We became the orchestra. We were the music." Imagine the sight. Entire choirs forming on the balconies of the highest spires, their voices a symphony of pure, unfiltered suffering. Their agony was the melody, a piercing soprano of despair that echoed through the canyons of the hive. Below them, percussion sections formed in the grand squares, the rhythmic thud of flesh on bone keeping a terrifying beat. The city was no longer a place of living beings. It had become a single, living instrument, playing a requiem for its own sanity. The air itself grew thick with the sound, a tangible miasma of psychic and sonic energy. Off-world visitors who approached the system reported hearing it even through the void of faint, ghostly music that chilled their very souls and warned them away. The city was broadcasting its torment across the stars. It wasn't just a city screaming, it was a civilization achieving a terrible, final form of expression. What was the source of this music? An ancient entity awakened a mimetic plague, a psychic weapon of unimaginable power. The archives offer no clear answer. They only describe the result. A capital city, a beacon of its culture, collapsing into a chattering, screaming, harmonious hellscape of its own making. The citizens were no longer individuals. They were notes in a grand, terrifying composition. They were the city that screamed, and their songs a warning that echoes still in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Thank you for joining me on this descent into madness. The universe is filled with wonders, but also with horrors that defy our comprehension. If you found this tale as chillingly fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the lost and the damned. Stay curious, and listen closely to the silence. You never know what music it might hold. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the chilling world of the echoes of silence. Today, we're dissecting perhaps the most pivotal and heart-stopping chapter of the entire saga. Chapter 10, The Last Performance. This is where the crescendo of dread that has been building since the very first page finally breaks, and the consequences are nothing short of cataclysmic. The chapter opens with Lucenvar in a state of absolute desperation. He's finally understood the true, terrifying purpose of the Maestra's final composition. This isn't just a piece of music, it's a ritual. A key, a summons to tear down the veil between her spectral, echoing existence and our tangible reality. The score is the anchor that will pull her, in her full, horrifying form, into the world of the living. The atmosphere is thick with tension. Lucenvar isn't just fighting a ghost or a memory anymore. He's fighting a concept, an entity weaving itself into the fabric of existence through sound. The narrative describes him racing against the unseen, against the very air vibrating with the Maestra's nascent power. He knows that every tick of the clock, every phantom note that seems to hang in the air, brings her closer. His goal is simple and primal. Destroy the score. Destroy the source. The scene where he finally gets his hands on the manuscript is pure adrenaline. The paper is described as feeling unnaturally cold, almost pulsing with a malevolent energy of its own. It's not just ink on a page. It's a living document, a conduit for the Maestra's will. You can almost feel the brittle texture of the old parchment and smell the musty, ancient scent mixed with something else, something akin to ozone and decay. And then comes the act itself. Lucenvar, with trembling hands, brings a flame to the score. The fire consumes the notes, turning the intricate, dangerous melody into ash. For a fleeting moment, there's a sense of triumph, a gasp of relief. He did it. He stopped her. The physical representation of her power is gone, turned to dust and smoke. The description of the ink blistering and the pages curling into blackness is incredibly vivid. It feels like a victory. But this is where the true horror of the chapter, and perhaps the entire book, slams into Warsay. Lucenvar's own words haunt the narrative, a chilling epitaph to his failed attempt. I burned the notes, but the song had already begun. What a devastating line. It encapsulates the terrifying truth that he was too late. The performance had already started. The music wasn't just on the paper anymore. It had been released. It was in the air, in Tikos, in the very structure of the building around him. This is the genius of the author's writing. The thread is no longer something you can touch or burn. It has become ethereal, unstoppable. How do you fight a song that's already being sung? How do you silence an echo? The fire destroyed the instrument, but not the music. The Maestra summons wasn't just the score. The score was merely the conductor's baton to begin the symphony of her arrival. The final pages of the chapter are a masterclass in psychological horror. Lucenvar is left in the silence, a silence that is now more terrifying than any sound, because he knows it's not empty. It's a loaded silence, the pause between movements in a symphony of doom. The air crackles, the shadows seem to deepen, to coalesce. He didn't stop the performance. He only witnessed the prelude. By destroying the score, he might have inadvertently removed the only thing that gave the music structure, a defined beginning and end. Now, what's left is a chaotic, unending, and malevolent improvisation. The chapter leaves us, and Lucenvar, standing on the precipice of a new reality, one where the Maestra is no longer a ghost haunting a specific place, but a presence bleeding into the world itself. The last performance isn't just a concert, it's a transformation of reality, and Lucenvar has just realized he was sitting in the front row. The implications are staggering. Is she now a part of the world's very fabric? Can she manifest anywhere, anytime? The questions are terrifying, and the book gives us no immediate answers, leaving us in the same state of dread as our protagonist. The last performance is a turning point that elevates the story from a ghost hunt to an apocalyptic struggle. It's about the permanence of art, the power of ideas, and the horrifying concept that some things, once set in motion, can never be undone. It redefines the very nature of the antagonist and sets the stage for a final act that promises to be truly terrifying. What did you all think of this chapter? Did that final line send a shiver down your spine like it did for me? Let me know your theories and reactions in the comments below. I am really curious to hear what you think will happen now that the song is free. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through such a brilliant and scary story. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the books and stories we all love. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Until then, be careful what you listen to in the silence. Today, we journey to a world that tasted the bitterest dregs of damnation, a planet whose name is now a byword for utter annihilation, Kixis Prime. Its story is not one of glorious last stands or heroic sacrifice, but a chilling reminder of how quickly the threads of order can unravel, and how the Imperium's final solution is often as terrifying as the threat it seeks to eliminate. The fall of Kixis Prime began not with a thunderous invasion, but with a whisper, a subtle corrosion of faith, a slow poisoning of the soul that crept through its towering hive cities like an unseen plague. Kixis Prime was, by all accounts, a typical imperial world cog in the vast machine, its populace toiling in manufactorums, its governors pledging fealty to distant terra. But beneath this veneer of compliance, something sinister was taking root. Cults, once relegated to the shadowy underhives, began to surface, their profane rituals growing bolder, their influence spreading from the dregs of society to the gilded spires of the nobility. These were not the brutish uprisings of simple heretics. The rot on Kixis Prime was orchestrated by a master of deceit, a sorcerous cabal dedicated to the architect of fate. They promised power to the ambitious, knowledge to the curious, and escape to the desperate. Promises are potent weapons in the 41st millennium, and on Kixis Prime, they found fertile ground. The Planetary Defense Force found their authority challenged. not by open rebellion, but by a populace that no longer listened. The local ecclesiarchy priests preached sermons to empty cathedrals, their words of faith drowned out by the seductive murmurs of forbidden lore. The initial imperial response was tragically predictable and wholly inadequate. A small detachment of the Adeptus Arbites was dispatched to restore order, their rigid doctrines and brute force tactics ill-suited for the subtle, psychological warfare being waged. They made arrests, conducted public executions, and declared curfews. But these actions only fanned the flames of dissent. For every cultist they purged, 2 more rose to take their place, emboldened by their perceived martyrdom and the growing power of their unseen patrons. The arbitrators became symbols of oppression, not salvation, further pushing the populace into the clutches of chaos. It was then that the first true signs of the warp's touch began to manifest. The sky above the capital city of Hive Primus began to shift, its familiar gray pilar swirling with unsettling hues of violet and green. Vox transmissions became filled with static that whispered names and offered impossible truths. Citizens reported nightmarish visions, their dreams haunted by labyrinthine corridors and a single, ever-watchful eye. The very laws of physics began to fray at the edges. Objects would move of their own accord. Shadows would stretch and writhe with malevolent intent, and time itself would seem to dilate and contract. Kixis Prime was no longer just a world in rebellion. It was becoming a gateway. The tipping point came during a grand procession meant to reaffirm imperial authority. As the planetary governor addressed a coerced crowd from his balcony, the sky tore open. A rift of pure, raw immaterium bled into reality, a swirling vortex of madness and energy. From this tear in the veil, the true architects of the planet's damnation emerged. Demons of Tzeentch, horrors of iridescent feather and shrieking flame, spilled forth. The disciplined ranks of the PDF broke in terror as their last fire proved useless against these ever-shifting monstrosities. The crowd, once merely disaffected, was now a screaming mob, their sanity shattering like glass. The chaos that followed was absolute. Warp Energus, no longer content to just seep through, now flooded the planet. Entire cities were consumed in tides of raw, untamed power. Citizens were twisted into gibbering chaos spawn, their bodies and minds warped beyond recognition by the raw stuff of the warp. Buildings of plasteel and adamantium melted like wax, reforming into impossible, screaming geometries that defied all logic. The ground itself heaved and split, swallowing entire hablocks into chasms that led not to the planet's core, but to the realm of chaos itself. Kixis Prime was no longer a world. It was an open wound in the fabric of reality. The few surviving Imperial loyalists sent out a desperate, final plea, a distress signal, screaming across the void, laden with terror and data screeds of the horrors unfolding. The signal was received, not by a relief fleet, but by the cold, analytical mind of the Inquisition. The data was reviewed, the astropathic projections analyzed, and the conclusion was swift, merciless, and final. Lord Inquisitor Vorkus, a man for whom sentiment was a fatal flaw, reviewed the case of Kixis Prime. He saw not a world to be saved, but a contagion to be cauterized before it could spread. The taint was too deep, the demonic incursion too complete. The planet was lost, and so the final, dreadful judgment was passed. Vorkus declared the order, transmitted with chilling finality, set into motion the Imperium's most terrible weapon. A black ship of the Inquisition, accompanied by a retribution fleet, translated into the tortured system. They did not engage the demons. They did not attempt to land troops. Their mission was one of purification by annihilation. From the cold vacuum of space, they unleashed the planet killer. Cyclonic torpedoes, weapons capable of cracking a world's crust and igniting its very atmosphere, descended upon Kixis Prime. For those still alive on the surface, whether loyalist, heretic, or demon, the end was the same. A blinding flash of light, brighter than 1,000 suns, engulfed the world. The Emperor's mercy, as it is so often in these dark times, came in fire. The torpedoes struck, and the planet screamed. The surface was scoured clean by a global firestorm. Mountains were turned to molten slag, oceans boiled away into radioactive steam, and the very atmosphere was set ablaze. The demonic rift, its anchor point obliterated, collapsed in on itself, its otherworldly energies consumed by the pure, physical wrath of mankind. When the fires died down, nothing remained of Kixis Prime but a blackened, lifeless cinder, its orbit littered with the radioactive dust of 1 billion souls. The Inquisition recorded the event with a single, chilling epitaph in the Ordo Malleus archives: sanctioned, cleansed, concluded. The story of Kixis Prime serves as a stark lesson. In the 41st millennium, there are fates far worse than death, and sometimes the only salvation the Imperium can offer is absolute and total oblivion. Thank you for joining me on this bleak journey into the lore of Warhammer 40,000. If you appreciate these deep dives into the grim darkness, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments which forgotten world or tragic event you'd like us to explore next. Until then, stay vigilant, and may the Emperor protect. And beautiful stories in modern sci-fi, the tale of Lucenvar and the fall of Kixis Prime. This isn't just a story about a lost world. It's a profound exploration of memory, art, and the staggering price of beauty. So, settle in as we unravel the tragic symphony of the living instrument. Our story begins on Kixis Prime, a planet renowned across the galaxies for its unparalleled beauty. Imagine a world where the very air shimmered with chromatic light, where mountains were carved from living crystal, and the flora sang in harmonious chorus with the wind. The people of Kixis Prime, the Kixians, were artists and dreamers. Their society built not on conquest or commerce, but on the relentless pursuit of aesthetic perfection. They believed that beauty was the ultimate expression of existence, the highest form of consciousness. At the heart of this vibrant civilization was Lucenvar. He wasn't a king or a warrior, but something far more revered on Kixis Prime. He was the planet's master composer. Lucenvar's genius was legendary. He could weave starlight into sonatas and compose lullabies from the whispers of the crystalline forests. His music was the lifeblood of the planet, echoing from the grandest concert halls to the humblest homes. It was said that Lucenvar didn't just write music, he channeled the very soul of Kixis Prime, translating its breathtaking beauty into melodies that could make even the coldest hearts weep. The Kixians lived in a golden age, insulated by their own splendor. They saw their world as a masterpiece, a finished canvas. But they forgot one crucial truth. The universe is a place of constant change, and even the most perfect creation can attract envy and destruction. They became so absorbed in their art that they grew blind to the darkness gathering at the edge of their system. This is where our tragedy truly begins. A shadow fell upon Kixis Prime, a force that cared nothing for art or beauty. It was a consuming entity, a nomadic empire known only as the Silence. They didn't seek to conquer or enslave. They sought to erase. They were the antithesis of everything. Kixis Prime stood for a void that hated harmony, a vacuum that despised creation. The Silence arrived without warning. Their ships were not vessels of metal and fire, but swarms of absolute nothingness that consumed light and sound. The vibrant colors of Kixis Prime faded to gray. The singing forests fell silent. The crystalline mountains crumbled into dust. It was a swift, merciless apocalypse. The Kixians, with no army and no concept of total war, were defenseless. They watched as their life's work, their entire world, was unmade before their eyes. Lucenvar stood in the capital city as the sky went dark. He watched as his people, his inspiration, were absorbed into the encroaching void. He tried to fight back, the only way he knew how. With music, he played a final, desperate symphony, a defiant scream of beauty against the encroaching emptiness. For a fleeting moment, his music pushed back the darkness, a single point of light in an ocean of oblivion. But it wasn't enough. The silence was absolute. But the silence didn't just destroy. It twisted, it warped. It had a cruel, artistic sensibility of its own. As the last vestiges of Kixis Prime vanished, the silence focused on the source of that final, defiant note of beauty. They saw in him not an enemy to be erased, but a trophy to be remade, a monument to their victory. They would not grant him the mercy of oblivion. Instead, they performed a horrific act of cosmic surgery. They took his body, his very essence, and reshaped it. His bones were stretched and hollowed into resonant chambers. His nerves were restrung into vibrant, sensitive strings. His lungs became the bellows, his heart the percussive beat. They transformed Lucenvar, the master composer, into an instrument, a living, sentient instrument of bone and nerve, forever bound to the memory of his lost home. Lucenvar survived, but his survival was a curse far worse than death. He was no longer a man. He was a monstrous, grotesque fusion of flesh and musical form, a living sculpture of agony. His mind remained intact, a conscious observer trapped within this new, horrific body. He was now the sole surviving remnant of Kixis Prime, its final, living archive, the memories of his world, its beauty, its people, its music, all of it, was encoded into his very being. The vibrant landscapes were now phantom pains in his stretched sinews. The faces of his loved ones were silent screams trapped in the resonance of his hollowed bones. He was both the memory and the melody of Kixis Prime, a sentient requiem. Now, Lucenvar drifts through the silent void of space, a solitary figure of profound sorrow. He is no longer capable of speech, but he can still create music. It is his only function, his only purpose. But the music he plays is not his own. It is the song of his world, a symphony of remembrance. To play, he must contort his own body, pulling on his nerve strings, forcing air through his bones. Each note is an act of self-inflicted agony, a physical reliving of his world's destruction and a loving recreation of its beauty. He plays the sunrise over the crystal mountains. He plays the laughter of children in the singing forests. He plays the final, defiant symphony against the silence. He plays his own transformation, the tearing and reshaping of his body. Each performance is a cycle of torment and tribute. This is where we find the story's most powerful and heartbreaking line. When encountered by a lost traveler who asks what he is doing, Lucenvar communicates not with words, but through a pure, telepathic wave of emotion and melody that translates into a single thought in the traveler's mind. I play myself, again and again, so they never forget what beauty costs. This sentence is the core of his existence. He endures an eternity of pain not out of self-pity, but out of a sacred duty. He has become a living monument, ensuring that the memory of Kixis Prime and the price of its perfection will never be lost to the indifferent universe. His music is a warning, a lament, and a love letter, all played on the strings of his own soul. The story of Lucenvar forces us to confront difficult questions. What is the true value of art? Is beauty worth any price? And what is the nature of memory when everything else is gone? Lucenvar's existence is a paradox. He is a creation of the very force that destroyed his world, a beautiful, musical thing born from ultimate ugliness. He is a testament to the idea that even in the face of absolute annihilation, memory and art can persist, albeit in a tortured and twisted form. His ongoing performance is not just for others, it's for himself. It's a way to keep his world alive within the confines of his own prison. He is both the artist and the canvas, the musician and the instrument, the mourner and the memoria. He embodies the idea that to remember is to feel, and sometimes to feel is to suffer. Lucenvar's story is a chilling reminder that the greatest beauty can inspire the greatest destruction, and that the act of remembrance can be both a sacred duty and an unbearable burden. He is the ghost in the machine, the song in the silence, the living instrument whose every note is a tear for a world that was too beautiful to survive. He plays on, a solitary symphony in the dark, ensuring that as long as he exists, Kixis Prime will never truly be silent. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the story of Lucenvar. It's a heavy one, but incredibly powerful. What do you think about his fate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed deep dives into speculative fiction like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue to explore these amazing worlds. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we read delving into a story that sits at the very heart of the eternal struggle between order and chaos. A tale of art, corruption, and the haunting echoes of memory. We re-explore in the grim fate of the artist Lucenvar and the dark purpose he serves even after his physical demise. This is the story of the Inquisition's archive. Imagine a vault, deep within an imperial stronghold, silent save for the hum of ancient machinery. This is no ordinary archive filled with dusty tomes. It is a library of souls, a repository of consciousness ripped from the flow of time, and within one of its crystalline caskets, a ghost still flickers. This is where they keep Lucenvar. Not the man, but the echo of him, his consciousness perfectly preserved, a digital phantom trapped in an eternal, looping nightmare. Lucenvar was once a master artist, a sculptor whose hands could breathe life into cold marble. His works were celebrated across systems, each piece a testament to human genius and the beauty of the Imperium. But art, in its purest form, is a channel for emotion, for passion, for ideas that can transcend the mundane. And in the grim darkness of the far future, such channels are asylely twisted. They can become conduits for something far older and more sinister than humanity itself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Lucenvar's art began to change. A subtle curve that was not quite right, a shadow in the marble that seemed to shift when you weren't looking, an expression on a statue's face that hinted at a forbidden ecstasy. His patrons saw only a bold new direction, a daring evolution of his style. They didn't see the whispers that had begun to curl into his mind, the promises of true creation, of art unfettered by the limitations of reality. They didn't see the tendrils of chaos. His final masterpiece, the one that sealed his fate, was a grand monument meant to glorify an imperial victory. But when it was unveiled, the crowd saw not triumph, but a swirling tableau of beautiful madness. The figures were both divine and monstrous, their forms flowing in impossible geometries, their faces contorted in a silent scream of agonizing rapture. It was a gateway, a piece of art so infused with the power of the warp that it sung a siren song to the unstable and the unwary. The Inquisition was swift, but for a mind like Lucenvar's, a mind that had touched the very fabric of chaos and translated its language into physical form, a simple execution was a waste. The Ordo Malleus saw a unique opportunity. They didn't just want to punish the heretic, they wanted to understand the heresy. They needed to know how the rot begins. How does a loyal citizen, a celebrated artist, become a willing instrument of the great enemy? So they captured him, and through arcane and terrifying technology, they separated his consciousness from his body. They preserved his every memory, every thought, every single brushstroke of his descent into damnation. He became their most valuable exhibit, a living textbook on the subtle art of chaotic infiltration. They locked his soul in a memory engine, a device that allows them to endlessly replay his life. Think about that for a moment. An eternity of reliving your own downfall. Within this digital prison, Lucenvar is forced to watch, over and over. The first moment a strange new idea sparked in his mind. He feels the thrill of forbidden inspiration, the joy of creating something truly unique, and then the dawning horror as he realizes what he has unleashed. He is forced to witness the corruption of his own soul, not as a distant memory, but with the full, raw emotion of the first time, again and again. Inquisitors and their most trusted acolytes gather in the cold light of the archive. They are the students. They plug into his memories, walking through the galleries of his mind. They see through his eyes, feel his hands guiding the chisel. They are searching for the patterns, the tells, the almost invisible signs of warp influence. They study how a single, blasphemous symbol, hidden in the filigree of a statue's armor, could act as a psychic beacon. They learn how the precise arrangement of colors in a mural could subtly alter the perceptions of those who viewed it, planting seeds of doubt and discontent. Lucenvar's memories are a Rosetta Stone for the language of chaos. Through him, the Inquisition learns to spot the painter whose landscapes contain just a hint of a world that should not be. They learn to identify the musician whose symphonies hide discordant notes that can fray the sanity of the listener. He is their unwilling teacher in the endless war against an enemy that fights not just with blades and bolts, but with ideas, with beauty, with art. And what of Lucenvar himself? Is there anything left of the man, In the brief moments of lucidity between the looping torments, a single, coherent thought is sometimes recorded by the machine's monitors. It's a whisper from the ghost in the machine, a flicker of self-awareness in the abyss. They keep me alive to listen to my own sins. It is his only reality now, not a punishment in the traditional sense, but a state of eternal, agonizing utility. He is a tool, a resource, a cautionary tale made manifest. His art, which he believed would grant him immortality, has done so in the most twisted way imaginable. He is remembered, yes. He is studied, but he is not celebrated. He is a specimen, pinned and dissected for the good of the Imperium he betrayed. His genius, once his glory, is now the very engine of his eternal torment, a constant reminder of the price of hubris and the terrible, seductive power of a single, beautiful, corrupting idea. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That your own mind, your own memories, could become a prison designed by your enemies. It adds another layer of grim reality to this universe we love to explore. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the Inquisition's dark archives. If you found this story as fascinating and terrifying as I did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales from the lore. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and may your thoughts remain your own. Slow, melancholic piano music begins, then fades to a faint, ambient hum. Have you ever wondered what true silence sounds like? Not the quiet of a library, or the stillness of a forest at midnight. I mean, absolute silence, the kind that comes after everything else is gone. This is the story of Lucenvar, the last musician, and his quest for a single, perfect note. A quest that gave him exactly what he asked for, and in doing so, cost him everything. This is Chapter 14. The silence after music. In the beginning, before the end, the world was a symphony. Every footstep on the pavement was a beat, every conversation a melody, every gust of wind a harmony. Lucenvar heard it all. He was a composer of unparalleled genius, but he was haunted. Haunted by an imperfection he perceived in the music of existence. He believed that, somewhere, hidden within the cacophony of life, lay one single, perfect note. A note so pure, so resonant, that it would bring the entire universe into flawless harmony. He dedicated his life to finding it. He built a colossal instrument, a machine of brass and crystal and wire that spanned a continent. He called it the harmonizer. It wasn't meant to play music, but to to filter every sound in existence, from the whisper of a dying star to the beating of a hummingbird's wings, and isolate that one, perfect frequency. His colleagues warned him. They called it obsession madness. They said that true beauty lies in the flaws, in the chaotic interplay of countless. Lucenvar didn't listen. He saw only the goal. He spent decades refining the harmonizer. Cities rose and fell around him. Empires crumbled, but he remained focused, his world shrinking to the glowing dials and trembling needles of his machine. He grew old, his body frail, but his spirit burned with the fire of his quest. He believed the world was falling out of tune, becoming more dissonant, and only he could fix it. He saw his work not as a personal obsession, but as a salvation for a world he barely participated in anymore. Then, one day, it happened. A needle quivered. A crystal began to glow with an impossibly pure light. The harmonizer had found it. The perfect note. Lucenvar's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the culmination of his entire existence. With a trembling hand, he flipped the final switch, not to isolate the note, but to amplify it, to broadcast it across the globe, forcing the world into the perfect harmony he had always dreamed of. The note that emerged was not a sound. It was more than a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration that resonated not in the ears, but in the very atoms of being. For one beautiful, fleeting moment, everything was in perfect alignment. The wind ceased its blowing. The oceans stilled their tides. The frantic beat of every heart on the planet synchronized into a single, majestic pulse. It was breathtaking. It was divine. It was perfection. And then it was over. The resonance was too perfect. The harmony too absolute. Life, in its beautiful, chaotic mezzanenses, could not withstand such flawless order. It was like tuning a guitar string tighter and tighter until it snaps. The birds in the sky, their songs silenced, simply stopped. The trees, their leaves no longer rustling, turn it to dust. The oceans, once teeming with life, became vast, sterile pools of water. And the people, everyone, everywhere, in that single, perfect moment of universal harmony, simply ceased to be. Their final, synchronized heartbeat was their last. The note had not just harmonized the world, it had canceled it out. Every sound, every motion, every life was a deviation from that perfect frequency, and in its presence, they were all corrected. Erased. Lucenvar was spared. The harmonizer, the source of the note, had shielded him within its core. When the resonance faded, he stepped out of his machine into a new world, a world of utter and complete silence. The ruins of cities stood like gravestones around him. The sky was a blank, cloudless canvas. The wind was gone. There was no birdsong, no distant traffic, no echo of laughter or weeping. There was nothing. At first, he felt a triumphant peace. This was it. The ultimate quiet. The flawless canvas upon which he could finally compose his masterpiece. But as he walked through the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling metropolis, a different feeling began to creep in. Loneliness. A loneliness so profound, so absolute. It was a physical weight. He was the only moving thing in a static world, the only consciousness in a sea of non-being. He tried to make a sound. Shouted. The noise was jarring, alien, a violation of the perfect stillness. It had no echo. It simply left his lips and died, absorbed by the infinite void. He tried to play music, striking the keys of a dust-covered piano in a ruined concert hall. The notes were hollow, empty things. They had no one to hear them, no life to give them meaning. Music, he realized, was a conversation, and he was the only one left to speak. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Time itself seemed to lose its meaning. There were no seasons to mark its passing, no day or night cycle as the planet's rotation had been stilled. There was only the unchanging, gray twilight of a world, paused, forever. Lucenvar wandered the silent globe, a ghost in his own museum. He was no longer Lucenvar, the composer. It was simple. Presence. A biological machine that continued to function. His own body became the only source of sound in the entire world. The soft thud of his own heart, the whisper of air in his lungs, the faint, electrical hum of his own nervous system. He became hyper-aware of these tiny, internal noises. They were the last remnants of the chaotic symphony he had worked so hard to silence. And in that unending quiet, a horrifying thought took root in his mind. The perfect note he had sought, the ultimate harmony. What if it wasn't a frequency to be found in the outside world? What if the harmonizer, in its final calculation, had simply amplified the resonant frequency of known existence, the sound of absolute zero, the music of the void? He now sits in the ruins of the world, a solitary figure in a landscape of dust and memory. He is no longer old, nor is he young. The perfect note has suspended him in time, a living monument to his own devastating success. He is surrounded by a silence so complete that he can hear the faint hum of his own living body, a lonely, imperfect note echoing in the eternal emptiness. And he thinks to himself, Obran obred, the same final, terrible refrain. I asked for one perfect note. I found eternity instead. The silence is his symphony now. The hum of his own cells is the only melody, and his audience is no one. He achieved the perfection he craved, but he learned the ultimate truth too late. That music, that life itself, isn't about perfection. It's about the spaces between the notes, the dissonance that resolves into harmony, the shared experience of listening together. Without that, a perfect note is just another form of silence. The most profound silence of all. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoy explorations of thought-provoking ideas like this, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. It helps us create more content for you to enjoy. Let me know in the comments what you think the true meaning of perfection is. Until next time, stay curious. In the quiet between stars, I still hear her tuning. It's a sound I've chased across galaxies, a phantom melody that promises reunion. They say, time heals all wounds. But what about the silences it leaves behind? What about the echoes of a song, unfinished? Every hum of a ship's engine, every whisper of stellar wind, I mistake it for a violin, for the sound of her getting ready for a performance that will never happen. Or perhaps one that is yet to come. She taught me that every composition has its final note, but she never said what comes after. So I listen. In the vast, silent concert hall of space, I listen, and I wait for the downbeat. Because somewhere, I know, the Maestra is still waiting to